So, Pothik, welcome again. I think you want to say something to clarify on your comments about death earlier, right?
Right. So before we begin this segment, I would ask your permission to clarify something that I've been saying in the last two segments, which is basically this my constant harping on the question of death and how we need to work with death. I hope people don't misunderstand me and think that I am advocating some kind of loony left cult line of people need to die for capitalism to come to an end. I thought that I should, maybe I'm being a little too literal-minded here, but I thought I should clarify that what I'm basically saying is that if the discourse of life is entangled with the production, with the process of capitalist production and with the question of reproduction, social reproduction of capital, and of preserving individuated subjects as the necessary units of capitalist production, then the discourse of death, basically, that I am trying to hold up as an antagonistic position against the discourse of life, basically, is meant basically to advocate the negation and the dying of precisely this individuated subjecthood, and death as basically the persistence of determinate negativity. What Marx and Engels in German ideology call communism as the real movement, which is the abolition of all prevailing state of affairs, basically. So death is the death of existence, and existence is an abstraction. It is a prevailing state of affairs. So the negation of all prevailing state of affairs and the persistence of that negation, the real movement, is what I mean when I say that we need to work with the idea of death, basically.
So, great that you kind of clarified it, but I think it only kind of thickens the plot there, Pothik, because to me it looks like what you pointed out earlier, and of course you are not completely backtracking on that, and I hope you don't, which is that
not at all.
which is precisely the question that when it comes to death, I think a lot of us, critical theory, continental theory, a lot of it is, I think, not really able to handle death itself, that it's much easier to say when it handles death. One is, of course, it's easier to handle life, but even before I go there, to me it looks like even when they handle death is always treated as like something which could have been avoided, as a mishap, that somebody died due to kidney failure, right? Somebody died because he did not get medicine on time. So much so somebody will even say that somebody died because he couldn't be rushed to the hospital because there was traffic jam or something and heart fell. He got a cardiac arrest or something like that. So death is always seen as a lapse in life, in this world. But death per se, where does it take you? What happens with death? And there's this very interesting, as you know, George's Bataille has thought so much about this. I didn't mean to go there, but now that we are talking about death, to me it looks like, and even with the coronavirus pandemic, to me it looks like the fear of death or the possibility of death, that we are, say, doing social distancing and we are kind of atomized in our own homes. Okay, maybe we are connecting through the internet, but the social distancing has created that kind of a
further atomization, the process of atomization.
Yeah,
the process of atomization.
Yeah, people like Agamben are really worried that this is like the end of all kinds of social bonds, and yet in our minds somewhere we are still connecting with each other. The fact that, I mean, the death, in a way, the possibility of death founds the community of absence, community of absence that Bataille talks about, because we are relating. The way some guy in a little town in India is following Wuhan in China, they knew nothing about it. Now somebody's done a spoof which is circulating on WhatsApp, where somebody is named Wuhan Chadda or something, or somebody is named pandemic bhatti, you know, like these are
Acha,
like,
acha.
you know, so there is a connection, or like the way we are following news about the favelas in Brazil, right? So this is all kind of
Right,
coming together through this coronavirus fear of death.
right,
And
right.
there, you know, but this I want to just read you this little passage. Let me see if because I've been kind of engaging with it. Jean-Luc Nancy, while talking about the community, if we can think about a community which is formed not just because of the fear of death, but with the possibility of death, then Jean-Luc Nancy,
Right.
he's written where he's kind of basically trying to summarize Bataille, and he writes something very interesting, and there is a double movement in what he says, that first there is an undoing, and then again there is a new kind of a community which emerges. I'll just read that passage, and I think it actually connects with something which you said in the last session that we were talking about. Okay, so Nancy is explaining Bataille's notion of community, and Nancy says that community, you know, they talk a lot about communication, community and communication, as you know.
Right.
So,
Right.
so Nancy says community communicates its, I mean, according to Bataille, Jean-Luc Nancy writes, community communicates its contagion by its very interruption.
Right.
And it's interesting that the word contagion is also used. Like Jean-Luc Nancy, I don't think he has the pandemic coronavirus in mind, because this is from the Inoperative community, which is I think published in the 80s or something.
Right.
So community communicates its contagion by its very interruption. This contagion interrupts fusion and suspends communion. This contagion interrupts fusion and suspends communion, and this arrest or rupture once again leads back to the communication of community. Right? So there is this double movement. So it is true that, so it is true there is a kind of a, atomized life under capitalism or whatever social bonding we had, that got negated because of coronavirus, social distancing, contact tracing, and all of that. But in a different way, we are again connecting with each other, you know. And Pothik, now that we are at it, that's precisely my problem with Agamben, you know, where Agamben is seeing the surveillance society, the emergency powers that is accumulated in the state. But I think he's not really seeing that even within this otherwise very grim scenario of coronavirus and pandemic and lockdown, still there is a different kind of a solidarity which emerges within it in a kind of a immanent way, right? So when you're talking about death, I was reminded that there is a kind of a lack of theorizing around death and the fear of death. And you know what happens if social theory gives up this task, critical theory gives up this task, or thinks of death only in terms of as I said earlier,
interruption of life.
Interruption of life as a lapse from this. Then what happens, as with Agamben, is that then the church steps in. The faith steps in. And that's what Agamben, I don't know if you read that piece where he is saying that where is the church? Why is the church not going and attending to the dead? Because it is the duty of the church to put faith over life.
Pope Francis takes his name from Saint Francis, who would embrace the lepers, basically.
Embrace the lepers, yeah. So I mean, I think otherwise I think that's a very bold imagination that Agamben has, and I think, forget about the church and faith and all of that. I thought, and earlier when you were talking about the courage of the workers who are out there, you know, and not you and me, right? So the courage also meant that why aren't, say, you and me also out there attending to the dead, right?
So
and
as
that
individuals,
risk and that courage.
Right. So as individuals, as individuals, we are condemned to be afraid for our lives. Basically, even those workers, when you talk to them as individuals, they are also talking about life. Basically, you see. So it's not that I'm talking about the courage of individual workers. I am not even talking about courage as the aggregation of their various individualities, as a mass aggregation of their various individualities, as a mass averaging of their various individualities. It is not in that sense that one is talking about the courage to die. One is talking about the courage to die, or the courage to quote death, as a collective subject, as the collective intelligence, as the collective doing of what those migrant workers are doing as a collective when they are moving away from these cities, when they're flying away from capital, when they're flying away, when they're refusing to let their labor power when they're refusing to be labor power, when they're refusing to be repositories of living labor that is meant to be abstracted in its activation.
Exactly.
So when one talks of death, one talks of the death of precisely this individuated subject. This subjective individuation's death is what one is talking about when one is talking about death. And therefore death, if the discourse of life is the discourse of individuated subjecthood, is the discourse of capital, is the discourse of production relations, social relations of production that are constitutive of capital, right? Of relations, of relationality, and therefore of exchange, of value, of equivalence. If the discourse of life is the discourse of relations and equivalence, then the discourse of death is basically the discourse of the death of the individuated subjecthood and the emergence of the collective, or what Nancy would call inoperative community, or what Blanchard would say the unavowable community.
That's right.
Nancy writes inoperative community in response, I think, to Blanchard's conception of communism as unavowable community.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Then Nancy goes on to invoke Bataille and further extend Blanchard's argument. So this inoperative community is precisely this unavowable community. Is precisely that which cannot be abstracted, which is not an abstraction, which is not an objectification, which is not a mass of relations and equivalence, which is not about individuated subject.
So Pothik, if you
death. So basically, the only point that I want to make is that death is basically the discourse of death is the discourse of collectivity. It founds collectivity. As opposed to and it negates individuated subjecthood and social relations and capitalist relations of production that are constitutive of that individuated subject. It negates equivalence, it negates exchange.
And you know what? So you've kind of covered this side of things, as in this worldly things. It negates, the word you use, persistent determinate negation of capital and other things that death does. But if you were to think for a moment about what is there on the other side, the other side is blank, it's dark. Like what happens when you die? There's a kind of unknown, right? I remember Badiou talking about Bataille, and he says that Bataille really took the thought of the unknown to its extreme. So the death, if you were to now approach death from the other side and think of death as, and that's where also the invocation of church, faith, mercy, all these things come, where you are thinking of the person dying as a pure, like a human, like a irreducible human life losing itself, and then you don't say, you don't think about, okay, he died because he was poor, he did not get treatment at the right time or something. You are not going to refer to this. The padri, the pope will go and like treat the person as a pure death or something like that, because the pope is also, as a religious person, as a spiritual person, is supposed to be in touch with the other side, the other world, the divine or hell or whatever, whereas those of us who do not have let me say this now. Say when you are reading Andrei Platonov, now Platonov, without being a faith person, without being a Christian pope or something like that, because when we talk about faith or talking about the other side of death, vis-a-vis church, by invoking the church, it looks very problematic. But look at Platonov, Platonov seems to be in touch with something which is the unknown, which is like beyond something, beyond everything, basically. Right? He's in touch with something. And so when the 5-year plans and collectivization and industrialization and digging a drain and stuff like that, which is very mundane, is happening, he is seeing some kind of I don't know, it's not even a form of life. It's beyond a form of life on the other side.
Yes, we could call it the afterlife. We could call it
the afterlife. You know, in a very materialist sense. In a very materialist sense, right?
Absolutely.
So we have a project here at hand. You know, like in the coronavirus pandemic. Then, if we are then talking about death, and we are not going in the direction of faith or the church or something like that, and yet we want to develop a discourse on death, which is not just always talking about this life here, or a lapse or a failure in this life because of which the death happens, but death in itself. Then I think we will be able to approach, you know, some of the things that you were saying that you have in mind.
So what we need is a materialist theory of afterlife, basically.
Exactly.
That is exactly what people like Andrei Platonov or Walter Benjamin supply us with.
That's right. And you know what, Pothik, in this context, you know, I was thinking about the so-called frontline workers. Okay. From whatever I know, I have a lot of respect for them. They are risking a lot, even in India. Now in Bombay, so many nurses are dying, so many doctors are dying. So the frontline workers have come a kind of as a stand-in, you know, for those people who, okay, you do not have the faith-based people. We do not have Platonovians here, you know. So the frontline workers, I was hearing this story of a nurse who is with this person who is about to die. And because this person cannot call anyone, any of his near and dear ones, the nurse has to, is that person now, okay? And the nurse also just seen this patient, you know, but she has to suddenly develop that intimacy and be there when this person is dying. Right? So, so the frontline workers are maybe that today. I do not know how it's going to pan out. Maybe there will be movies be made about frontline workers in the coming days to come. Maybe there are a lot of tales and stories about them that has not yet come out in the public domain. But I think, yeah, you know, so thank you for bringing up the question of death here.
Because for me, death is precisely, as I said, it is what Marx and Engels call the real movement. It's that which is an abolition of prevailing state of affairs. It is the abolition of objectification. It is the abolition of objectification. It is the abolition of presence and metaphysics of presence. The moment you move out of the metaphysics of presence, the moment you go beyond the metaphysics of presence, you have moved into the beyond of the material.
That's right.
That beyondness is materiality, basically.
Exactly.
When you move beyond presence and its metaphysics, when you move beyond objectification, when you move beyond abstraction, basically. So the negation of abstraction, the overcoming of abstraction and the overcoming of objectification and the process of negation that this overcoming of abstraction, this overcoming of objectification, this overcoming of presence and its metaphysics amounts to is precisely death as a process. Persistent, determinate negativity. This is precisely what is material, because it is the overcoming of the metaphysical, the metaphysics of presence, the metaphysics of abstraction.
And the sense I get,
it is also the founding of collectivity.
Yeah, and the sense I get, Pothik, is that somewhere you are also trying to propose that death is something which capitalism cannot handle, like the value begetting value process.
Absolutely.
Cannot handle death.
Which is why it negates the first negation. It negates negativity. It abstracts negativity. So this is exactly the discourse of death as the sheer interruption of life is basically a capitalist discourse. It is a discourse where you appropriate the negative, you appropriate death in terms of existence. You appropriate negativity in terms of accumulation, in terms of abstraction, and you render it productive.
Yeah, and also the way the fear of death is deployed.
So it's not so much fear of death as it is the fear of losing one's life, basically.
Exactly. But that is completely deployed then again. You know, that becomes that becomes like something like it has an exchange value without use value kind of a thing. You know. Right,
like the universal equivalent.
That's right. You know, it becomes that, and
or exchange value is its use value. Its only use value is its exchange value. Basically, exchange value is its only use value.
And you know, the other thing, Pothik, and this is the last point we'll cover today, is when it comes to, as you were also mentioning, capital unable to handle death, and similarly also. A lot of us unable to handle death or losing one's life. There, to me, it looks like if you look at like in the broad kind of configuration of capitalists today, the way big capital or global capital or say, the ruling classes in France, in Italy, all these countries, including the US, the way they have been responding to the coronavirus, to me, it looks like they are pretty nervous about it. The kind of coherence that you see normally when they're handling oil crisis or they are handling some other war or terrorism or something. There's a kind of a coherence and a consensus within the ruling classes that you see. I saw it break down with the coronavirus. Like, think of this. France said that was trying to snatch away the masks and PPE coming for Italy, right? All the European countries, the EU was completely smashed. Okay, it is not just like Brexit and all that. The EU, you didn't hear about the EU during the coronavirus, if you recall, right? So all these governments were fighting with each other. UK said initially that they will have herd immunity. Okay. Italy said, no, we will not have it. Spain said something else. Then suddenly, like Sweden came and said, no, we will have herd immunity till the end, right? And then we already know the differences between the Fauci vaccine industry and Trump. So within capital, what we see is that it is kind of gotten into some kind of a very bad kind of a trip on which capital is. So capital is not able to really show that kind of a coherence. And look at the differences between US and WHO. Of course, you can say that's partly because Trump is a cranky guy, he's a crackpot and all of that. But I think that's not just all, So the nervousness of the global capitalist class, because Boris Johnson got it, the super rich was getting coronavirus, anybody could get it, So your thoughts on it, and then we'll close it.
Actually, this aspect is not something that I've really thought about. But let me say this. But let me just briefly say this: that this lack of incoherence that you point out, this nervousness in the capitalist camp that you point out, this nervousness within capital, basically. Let's not call it the capitalist camp. Let's call it this nervousness within capital, which includes all of us, because there is no outside of capital. We are all inside capital. So this has to do, I think, in systemic terms, this has to do with this nervousness stems from the risk of sacrificing labor power. Because labor power, following Agamben says that bare life cannot, homo sacer can be killed, but it cannot be sacrificed. So following him, we can say that human bodies can be killed because the expenditure of labor power as living labor is its death, basically. But you also have to keep labor power alive as labor power. That is the moving contradiction, the living contradiction that Marx talks of when he says that capital is a living contradiction. So this nervousness stems from the fact that what do you do when labor power itself runs the risk of going extinct?
That's right.
Because that is the lifeblood of capital. Basically.
That's right.
Without living labor, there is no dead labor.
Yeah, and this entire thing about life versus livelihood, pandemic versus economy, we have to open the economy.
It is built into the structure of capital, basically.
Absolutely.
That is what the structure of capital is.
Yeah, they couldn't say that, oh, you know what, let's just extend the lockdown. We just have enough food, we have enough everything.
So production, livelihood is production. What is production? Production is the expenditure of labor power. What is expenditure of labor power? It is the death of labor power. But at the same time, you cannot allow labor power to die. You cannot sacrifice labor power. You can let labor power die. You can kill labor power, but you cannot allow it to go completely extinct. So then the question of life comes in. So this neurosis, this bipolarity, this discourse, this neurotic discourse, this bipolar discourse, life over livelihood, livelihood over life. Sometimes there's a lockdown, sometimes there's a graded exit from lockdown. All this incoherence, all this nervousness is actually this closed symmetrical dialectic of life and production. That is capital.
That's right.
It is the structure of capital. That is the structure of capital in its moment of acute crisis.
Okay, great. Pothik, that was great talking to
Yes,
you.
great talking to you. Great talking to you, Saroj.
And I think we've covered some ground, and I hope whoever listens to it will enjoy it. So thank you, Pothik.
And doesn't think that we are advocating some kind of loony left cult of death, basically. I hope that message doesn't go through.
Yeah,
I'm very apprehensive.
Let's see, we keep it open there.
On that. Okay.
Okay, Pothik. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.